Welcome to the Reduce Cyber Risk Podcast, where we provide you the training and tools you need for your cybersecurity career. Hi, my name is Shon Gerber, and I'm your host for this action-packed, informative podcast. Join me each week as I provide you the information you need to grow your cybersecurity knowledge while taking practical and actionable steps to protect your business from the evil hacker horde. All right, let's get going. Welcome to Reduce Cyber Risk Podcast, March 11th, 2019. Hey, y'all, this is Shon Gerber with Reduce Cyber Risk, and we've got some great cybersecurity stuff out there for you as it relates to your business and to learning different cybersecurity aspects. First off, we're going to have some cybersecurity news. We got three main things we're going to talk about today, followed by some training around data classification. Now, the main things we're going to talk about today in the cybersecurity space and the news is a flaw in smart car alarms. There's approximately 3 million cars that have been affected by this, and we'll get into that in detail. The Equifax, they basically came out, again, Equifax once again, mentioned that they have neglected their cybersecurity as it relates to their company and what they've done. And then also transformational cybersecurity steps that you can do right now as a security officer or a security practitioner within your organization that you can have impact in relation to protecting your company and, bottom line, your job. But those are some key things to look at as we're going into the cybersecurity news space. Followed on with some cybersecurity training around data classifications and why data classification is important. This will be a key aspect if you are looking at your CISSP, along with any other aspects around cybersecurity from a skills perspective. So as we get into this, the cybersecurity news, we're going to have the smart car. Now, basically, there's about 3 million smart cars that were affected in this most recent breach. And what it comes down to is they were smart alarm systems that were set up within these vehicles. Now, as we get more and more interconnected with devices, and you're going to have Internet of Things that'll be integrated within your cars and your phones and any other device that is connected to the Internet. The Internet becomes a conduit to allow you to have greater access, flexibility, and in some cases a lot more ease and comfort as it relates to utilizing your vehicles and everything else in your life. You know, from light switches to computers to in this case here, your car. And what it was is that there was smartphone connectivity that was set up specifically for these vehicles, and there was an app that was in place that allowed them to connect to your car and to the alarm system. So what it basically did was it allowed them to have activated or mess with the cameras. So in most of these vehicles, there's some motion activated cameras that are set up with these alarm systems. One, to get a picture of who might be making some ruckus on the car, and so therefore that's all put into it's either sent to the cloud or there might be potentially a hard drive solution that's sitting within the device itself or within the car itself. As far as panic buttons, there's also a situation where there's a panic button where you can, and you probably have this now on your key fob that's on your car. You press the panic button, it goes wah, 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 wah. You know, makes that real loud, high-pitched screaming noise that just drives everybody crazy. It's really good to find your car when you're coming back from a long trip, but at the end of the day, that's what's connected to these alarm systems. Well, what happened is that the attackers are able to turn off the alarm. Okay, so that's bad, right? But here's another one that's kind of bad, is that they're able to listen in on conversations as the car is moving, whether it's stopped, going, moving, whatever that might be. They're able to listen in on the conversations that are occurring. Why? Because there's microphones within the vehicle itself. And this also happens with cars that are smart connected that have your phone connectivity built into it. Now, people I've talked to that have dealt with automobiles and the different aspects around connectivity have all stated that these systems are separate. You have your main driving system and then your your application system, the systems that are tied to running your radio, your alarm systems, and so forth. Well, it's been proven in the past that isn't always the case, but especially at these third-party aspects that are added to cars as kind of an add-on capability, usually after the car has been sold and purchased. These right there are set up to basically putting microphones inside your vehicle so that you can talk to the alarm or you can talk to the whatever you want, the system that's running it. So this is kind of bad, right? So now you've got a vehicle that's driving around that has microphones built into it that they're put in there on purpose for your alarm system, but are recording conversations. And so this was set up so that the API that was allowing this, so it's an application programming interface, and what it basically does is it allows for a set of standards, programming standards, so that people can plug their different programs into these products. So as an example would be, let's just say this alarm system. It has specific APIs built for it. Well, they may have contracted or outsourced another third party to do some of the pieces of this. Well, what they do is they create a set of standards and APIs where it allows third-party applications to plug into these systems and allows the transfer of data. APIs are a really great idea. It helps make the programming capability much more streamlined and much more useful, but that's where there are issues in. There are authentication issues as it relates to these APIs. Now, there was a Russian and a US-based company. Both had the same issue, but they fixed this situation. So looking at, as we're talking about this, one of the things to consider is you're probably saying, well, okay, they fixed it, so what? It's more or less to kind of highlight the fact that as we get more of these systems adding onto your cars or vehicles, that they're going to have more and more issues like this. And that comes down to a secure software development. Who is doing that? Are your developers or the developers of these applications understanding full secure software development? And the odds are high that they're probably not. There's a lot of really good people that are doing some great stuff in the development space, but most developers are they have timelines. They got to get this stuff out. And so some of the aspects around security may not be as important to them as they need to be. So the key point about all this is that, again, there are more and more systems connected. Make sure that whatever systems you're using, especially as it relates to microphones, ability to track you and so forth, that you're monitoring the fact that if they're getting updated and if there's issues with them. So again, system's been patched. Things are good. Not as big a deal. However, the bottom line is there's more and more of this stuff coming out. Now, back to Equifax. So there was a Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations basically put out there that, and they did an investigation of Equifax to find out what happened. How are they doing this? What caused part of these issues? Now, we all know that this Equifax happened about 2-3 years ago, and that ended up having a massive breach about personal data. And this came down to having this data available to way too many people, right? So I think I was part of the deal where it was like 140-some million people or something crazy like that were breached. And of those people that were breached, a lot of their personal information was stolen. So here's my recommendation. Plug for credit freezing. You need to do it. Make sure you do it. But bottom line is that they wanted to do a permanent subcommittee was looking for this on investigating this Equifax breach. Well, what it came out to was as they pulled this into was they didn't adhere to their own patching schedule. So what does that mean? Well, when they have probably a typical patching schedule, maybe once a quarter or once a month, that they put into place that they would take care of and they would patch these systems. They didn't meet their own patching schedule. Now, I will say that that's a little bit of a sleight of hand potentially. Not that I'm defending Equifax, but sometimes the patching schedule may be changes to it due to whatever reason that might be. Now, Equifax doesn't really have a leg to stand on. They're a big company. They should be doing these things. There are times when these things might not necessarily follow the same schedule due to whatever reason. However, they need to do that, right? So, but it just comes down to you need a defined schedule on how you're doing your patching. They also failed to locate the patch for the Apache struts. That was the vulnerability that was basically taken advantage of. And so that was a pretty significant one. And the Apache struts was also a front-facing system where, basically everybody in the internet has access to it. So those are things that need to be evaluated and make sure that they're taken care of, especially ones that are front-facing systems. They didn't have the basic tools to detect and identify changes to files. So they didn't have a good alerting and monitoring system in place to manage these products if there weren't changes to the files. They wouldn't know if somebody was within the environment or not making changes. So they didn't have a good logging and monitoring situation in place. They also had a patchwork of state data breach notifications causes some exacerbation. That was a bullet that I wrote, sorry. Basically, it came down to is these different state breach notification laws caused confusion with them. It caused them to have a situation where they didn't really know what to do and who to contact. And so those can cause some challenges. Is it GDPR? Is it the state of South Carolina? Is it Ohio? Is it where's your headquarters at? How do you do the breach notification? All those things cause some issues. And now with the changes up in Massachusetts, that's going to add more complexity to it. But again, bottom line is that the breaches and laws are going to continue to happen. So you're going to have more and more breaches, and you're going to have more and more laws. But there has to be some level of consistency, especially in the United States, as it relates to breach notification and handling out a situation that were to occur. Bottom line, Equifax did not do all they could do to protect their data. They didn't. They also didn't do a very good job, and we all saw that, how they dealt with the situation and how they rolled out the problem or told people about the problem. So there's a lot of learnings that Equifax could have learned out of this. Obviously, I'm sure they have at this point, and I know most of their leadership is no longer there. They have new people running the show. But bottom line is that you got to keep up with your stuff, and you got to keep up your patches. You got to make sure that your systems are updated, and that you have a good plan in place to deal with the situation in the event that a bad thing would occur, such as a breach. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is transformational cybersecurity. And basically, there's 3 paths on how to deal with that. Now, this is, as we're going to go into reduce cyber risk, we have multiple things we talk about as it relates to cybersecurity and what you can do as a cybersecurity professional on how to better protect your company and your business. And we're going to we always look at different strategies on how you can do this to best protect your company. And these are just some things that I saw in one of the articles around what could be done to help protect your company that I thought were kind of real easy, something that you could use and deal with on a daily basis. So the first one is basically you need to have a quick tech roadmap, and this came out of the article that I'll have the show notes that'll be in the show notes, and basically it's a list of key initiatives and projects that you need to be completed. So as it relates to cybersecurity, what are some of the key projects and initiatives that you need to have finished up for yourself? Okay, so with looking at that, then as you have those projects and initiatives, you need to focus on some key ones that are just like 1, 2, maybe 3 initiatives you want to get done for the year. Okay, you make sure that you do not have more than you actually can do. It happens way too often that, and I'm guilty of this, you have all these great initiatives, but you actually don't get any of them done because you're too busy just fighting fires and you don't account for enough time to do that. You also need to make sure it reaches the compliance achievements that you have or the compliance goals that you have for your company. What are those compliance goals? How are you going to deal with those? The other thing is you need to technically focus on a clear timeline. What timeline do you want to have these initiatives completed by? So does it meet your compliance requirements? Do you have a timeline? And pick a couple key initiatives to work on. Again, those are real key 3 buckets that you can focus on as you're just getting this thing out the door. And again, that's number 1. Have a real quick roadmap on how you're going to do it. Again, key initiatives, projects can be completed. Is it going to be a compliance requirement that you got to have or achievement that you want to achieve doing this? And then what is the clear timeline that you're trying to accomplish while getting it done? Now, the next bullet is going to be a risk-aligned strategy. How are you going to deal with the strategy as it relates to risk, right? So as you're looking at different aspects around cybersecurity, you need to take a risk-based approach. And this is no different than anywhere else, but a risk-based approach is going to go do wonders for you as it relates to trying to protect everything. You can't do it, so don't even try to do it. But you need to determine what is a clear vision on and your gaps and the risks that you have within your company to focus on those. And those should hopefully roll into the first bullet where you had key initiatives and projects. So you have your vision, your gaps, your risks that are associated. Those came up with your key projects, and that's what you got set aside. So that strategies should be aligned, though, with your leadership as well. And again, that's focusing specifically on breaching these key things in the first year. Okay. The other thing is look at the threat landscape that might be affecting your company. So if your company's a financial company, everybody's after you, but you need to consider who is the main threat that's against your company. If you deal highly with intellectual property, do you have individuals, rogue employees, or just other corporate entities that are trying to get access to your information? So again, these are different aspects you need to be aware of as it relates to setting up your risk strategy for your company. Then you also need to focus on the crown jewels. What does that mean? This comes back to data classification, which we're going to talk about coming up here in the next aspect of reduce cyber risk. But the data classification is going to be a big key in how you determine what are your crown jewels. because and that comes down to the crown jewels or what's in England, right? So whatever is the Queen's crown jewels that are sitting in, well, I can't remember what palace it is, not Buckingham, but whatever, one of those castles that you can go and look at. Well, you want to protect those with everything you possibly can. So you need to focus on protecting that specific data. So again, you have a clear vision, gaps and risks, you consider the threat landscape, and you focus on protecting specifically your crown jewels or your most important data. Now that was bullet 2, a risk-aligned strategy. Bullet 3 is your stakeholder focus. Okay, so these all kind of play together, but the first one was a roadmap, second one was a risk-aligned strategy, third one is a stakeholder focus. And what does that mean? That means your business documents, you need to focus on specifically what does the stakeholders, are they involved with your decision-making process? Is there a business document created specifically for working with the stakeholders on cybersecurity? Have you documented all this stuff? Have you shown them where you're at? You also need to have your board and executive endorsements around what you're trying to accomplish as it relates to cybersecurity. They need to be aware of it. They need to know what exactly you're trying to do as it is to protecting their data and their information. And then it needs to be forward-looking. It needs to be thinking about what is transformative for your company. What are some big initiatives that are going to occur within your company that you need to be ahead of, that you need to be aware of, and the stakeholders need to be aware of. So if you've been dealing with old 1980s technology and now all of a sudden you're moving into the 2000s, okay, not 2020s, but the 2000s, that might be transformative. And so if that's transformative, you're going to need to make sure the board's on board on what you're doing. I would highly recommend not going 2000s. Just go 2020. Just do it. You know you want to. Just do it. But that's a better option. And again, that needs to be stakeholder focused. And so when again, board and executive endorsement, future looking, transformative, and making sure that your board and all the people that you're working with, your CEO, the CIO, are all engaged and aware of what you're trying to accomplish, and they have alignment that they agree with you on this. Now, last thing is you need to build out a 30, 60, and 90-day plan. What are you trying to accomplish in the first 30 days, next 60 days, and the next 90 days? And you can do that. It doesn't have to be you took over and this is your first job and you have to go and set up a 30, 60, 90-day plan. You need to do that, but you also can do that every 90 days. Set up, what are you going to do for this 30 days? What are you going to do for this 60? What are you going to do for this 90? And again, that's thinking about how are you going to tackle the problem and deal with the situation at hand. All right, that's all we have for cybersecurity news, and so this is what we're going to talk about. We went with We Live Security, talked about the smart cars and what some of the issues were with that, SC Magazine, and Tech Republic. All right, let's get into the CISSP supplement, the training for the day. All right, this is data classification part 1 of the CISSP supplement from Reduce Cyber Risk. All right, so as we're dealing with data classification, there's some key considerations that you need to be aware of as you're looking to protect the data. And it kind of comes down to when you're classifying the data, it's all about protecting the data and what are you doing to ensure that it is adequately protected, right? So some key considerations to look at is how you file, categorize, or bucket your specific data. Now, this is based a lot on the sensitivity of the data. So if you have specific information that is super sensitive, you may put it in certain buckets. If you have data that is not very sensitive, you will obviously change the buckets that you put the information into. And it's designed to define and document a process for securing the data. It's a process to deal with it and how you're going to secure your specific information and your data that it goes for your company. The other reasons for the data classification process is to identify sensitive files, intellectual property, or trade secrets. So as you're looking to protect your information, you need to consider what are these things. And I've had a situation personally where I didn't really know what the trade secrets were. I didn't know what the intellectual property was, but it allowed me to have a conversation with the intellectual property owners to find out what is valuable to the company. And that's the one good thing about data classification is as you get into it, you'll find out that there are big parts of it that around that you didn't know. But when you talk to people, you'll get a good understanding of what is important to the business. It also allows you to secure this specific data. So as you don't really know where the data is at, it helps you understand where it is so that you can better secure it. It allows you to track regulated data to comply with regulations. How do you comply specifically with the regulations? And are you meeting the requirements that might be spelled out within the data classification aspects? You need to optimize your search capabilities, and this would include data indexing. How do you deal with the data specifically, and how is it indexed for your company? You means optimize the search capabilities as well. And you'd also discover statistically significant patterns that might be within the data as it relates to how you're protecting it, also where is it stored. And you may not know that these patterns even exist until you start kind of looking to classify it. So if you have a situation where you realize that my IP owners say that all of my data is high risk. Well, is that really true? Is it all high risk? So statistically, it might be that you really only have about 3% is actually high risk, and that you consider it at your most sensitive information. But that's where you won't know this until you try to do some level of data classification. It also helps you avoid or optimize your storage to avoid duplication and the situation where you have all these extra documents that you really don't need. You're focused on data classification. You realize, well, hey, I've got that document someplace else. Well, I've got this one someplace else. These are all key things to look at as you're dealing with data classification. Now, there's different types of data. There's important data, or I shouldn't say there's different types of important data. There's personal identifiable data, which is your PII, which is typically what in the United States they call it, is personal identifiable information. And this is tied to individuals. It could be their social security number, it could be medical numbers, it could be anything that's specifically tied to an individual. Then you have your protected health information. So you have your PII, which would be like your birthday, address, then your PHI, which is your notes from your doctor, or could be your medical records as they are stored electronically. That would be your PHI. And then there's proprietary data, which is your copyright, trade secrets, and so forth. Those are your intellectual property aspects that are set up as well. So those are really the main three types of data that you will run into: personal identifiable data, personal health information, and proprietary data. Now, there's business data that you would have that's normal type of stuff, your business classification type data, but the main highly sensitive ones are typically these three. Your business confidential data will be very specific to an individual or individual company, but as it relates to things that usually are regulated and have people that are watching them or of the highest risk to a company, it's usually these three things: PII, PHI, and your proprietary data. Now, the benefits of classification is, again, it talks about identifying the most critical data in systems that you may have your data residing in. So you can try to protect everything, but it's not going to work. So how do you deal with that? Well, that helps you find out where is your data stored. So you understand where it goes, or you understand what it is. Now you need to find out where it's stored, and then where does the data flow. Then the purpose around this then is it helps to lend to a more secure environment for your information. And it helps to make sure that you have the proper protections and mechanisms in place to protect the information. Now, it also may be required via legal or compliance means that you have to have this data better protected. And it may also help building out an intellectual property protection plan. So if you have the classification in place, you can have all these things ready to go. You can be set up so that your intellectual property plan is in place and it's going. You have stakeholders involved. Having data classification is a huge benefit for that. It also helps you determine who are the users that will be able to manage and access the data. Now, in the past, I've seen it where you have file shares that are set up specifically for an individual or for a group of people to access. Well, they go to this and they look at this data, but then when someone moves on to a new role, no one ever pays attention to it, and it basically becomes orphaned. And that happens a lot with information and data. So those are the different benefits around classifications. Now, there's many more benefits around data classification. However, these are the key ones that if you focus on those will definitely help you out and take you a long ways. Now, what are the downsides of data classification? Well, it can be challenging to document and discover everything that's in your environment. It can be really, really challenging. And to find all this information, especially if your company's been around for a while, you have multiple systems that are involved, data goes everywhere. There's opportunity costs and capital expenses that are associated with this classification as well. So as you do your data classification, there's costs that'll be tied to it. You also need to have a strong business buy-in on what you're doing. That they need to be able to influence your leadership to help you with this process, but there is some serious opportunity costs involved and capital expenses that are associated with doing it. So just the key point of all this is it's not easy. It really, really isn't. The other thing around classification can be really hard to do. So we talk about opportunity costs, but there can be a lot of physical barriers and also process barriers that you're going to have to work through as you're dealing with data classification. It's not a panacea. It's really hard lifting. Once it's done, you'll be happy it's done, but it's really some heavy lifting that you're going to have to do. Now, there's some criteria to classify the data. It's pretty substantial. Now, there's when you get into this, you need to look at some key things around it. Usefulness of data. How useful is the information to the company? Now, it could be useful to you, but it may not be useful to the main people that count, right? So you need to understand how useful is it to the business owners. Also, the value or cost of the data. Is it a big value of it? Does it your intellectual property that if the secret sauce to the Kentucky Fried Chicken, that's not sauce, they more have the 11 herbs and spices, but if there's a certain kind of formula or recipe that it makes you differentiate you from the competitors, if that thing is lost, that information is lost, how much of a value is that to your company? Data disclosure or modification damage. I mean, does it affect your reputational aspects of your company? Is there a business impact as it relates to data disclosure? So in many cases, this would happen, and this would cause significant issues with your company. So you got to ask yourself, what does that mean? How does that affect you in your business? So again, those are some key criteria that you need to consider. And it's not all of them, but again, usefulness of data, value or the cost of the data, and then potentially data disclosure. So as we talked about the criteria around the data classification, we also need to talk about the process. What is your classification process? Now, this comes down to is you identify an owner. How do you do that? You have to identify someone who's going to own the data and who's going to be responsible for it specifically. And again, it could be you could have a lot of data that's orphaned, and you're just going to have to pick somebody. Whether they like it or not, they're going to be the data owner. And then you have to work through with them on how to get it cleaned up. You need to determine how the data will be classified and labeled. Now, this comes down to physical systems, also to electronic systems. How are you going to classify and label the information? How are you going to classify the appropriate data from a is it like a partial system? Is it going to be unclassified, classified, top secret? How are you going to deal with that? Is it going to be and I would recommend that something smaller or a partial system is way better than nothing at all. Do you have an exception process in place to deal with this? There'll be times when you're going to have some level of exceptions to the data or to your criteria as well. You need to determine security controls to be used. What will those controls be? How are you going to manage those controls? And then procedures to declassify the resources and the procedures to transfer the information once it's classified. So you need to have documented procedures around how you're going to handle and move data around. And then also an enterprise or a business level instruction on how you're going to teach your people. Because if you don't have a way to teach your people and they don't really know how to do it, you're just setting yourself up for a lot of issues. So there's some key aspects around classification process that you should be aware of. All right, I hope you enjoyed this with Reduced Cyber Risk. We are going to be done for the day. We're going to go ahead and come back around to part 2. You'll get that next week as it relates to the data classification aspects of it. But I hope you enjoyed what you got here today. It's been a pleasure of mine to be able to serve you guys, but I hope everything's going well in your lives. Bottom line is, if you like this information, check me out on Facebook. Go to Facebook.com and check out Shon Gerber and Reduce Cyber Risk. Also, you can check me out on LinkedIn as well. Make sure that you go to reducecyberrisk.com. I've got a lot of free stuff there for you as well that you can check out, and it's some awesome stuff. All right, thanks a lot for joining me today at Reduce Cyber Risk. This is Shon Gerber. Have a great day. Talk to you later. See ya. Thanks so much for joining me today on my podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave a review on iTunes. I would greatly appreciate any and all feedback. Also, check out my videos that are on YouTube. Just search for Shon, that's S-H-O-N, Gerber, and you'll find a plethora of content to help secure your business. Lastly, head to Reduce Cyber Risk and look for the free stuff, lots of free stuff. And it's only available for our email subscribers. It's growing each and every day. Thanks again for listening. See ya!